Good afternoon. Hello. Good afternoon and welcome to the Kokomo-Howard County Public Library. We're delighted you decided to come and join us for Remembering Removal, Kokomo, Indiana, and the Last Communal Homeland of the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma. My name is Amy Russell, and I'm the head of the Genealogy and Local History Department, right across the hall where most of you were gathered a little bit ago. And we have some great resources over there. We'd love to have you come visit us sometime. In addition to today's program, we have some display cases with items from the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma and things like some maps, some examples of life currently, and some traditional games. Now, one of the display cases is over here. The second one is up on the second floor, almost directly up from where we are now. And there's one out at our South Branch Library on Center Road. We are live streaming this program right now via Facebook Live, but it will also be on our YouTube channel in a little bit. And you can access our YouTube channel by going to Kokomo-Howard County Public Library. So what you don't remember from today, or if you wish to have others watch it, check out YouTube. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Gil Porter. He'll give you a little bit of background about the program and introduce our guest speaker. Gil?
Thank you, Amy. Well, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for your time. I'm Gil Porter. I'm a local history writer in Kokomo. I'm representing the Howard County Historical Alliance and its principal affiliates, and this would include the Howard County Genealogical Society, the Howard County Historical Society, the Kokomo Early History Learning Center, and the genealogy department here at the library, which of course Amy is the head of. We definitely want to thank the library for providing us with the space and the time today. I do want to point out that our DJ for today is Adam Rude of the IT department here at the library. So we're very grateful for this organization to make this space available to us. We do have some other guests that we'd like to recognize. Richard Moore, a business community leader, very much a member of this community, but also representing another community here. And I think that nothing really better illustrates the idea of kinship in the Miami nation than family and extended family. Could we just see a show of hands of all the members of the Moore family that have joined us here today? We are so glad to have you. And one of Dick's sons is also here, who just happens to be the Honorable Tyler Moore, the mayor of Kokomo, Indiana.
Why does the family always laugh when they say honorable?
Thanks for joining us today. I think there's going to be some other discussion taking place.
Happens all the time, Sue.
Well, speaking on behalf of Kokomo and the community, it's terrific to have you as the head man of the village and the entire family, of course. We also want to recognize a gentleman who's also part of the library staff, Ron Tetrick, who is in the genealogy department. It was really Ron's work with the Moore family going back earlier in the year. The genesis of this, what we're doing today, really started with Ron and the work he was doing with the Moore family. And we realized that we also had an anniversary here coming up that's really pivotal to the Miami history, and we'll be hearing from our primary speaker here about that. But we decided to make it an event and to be able to gather and talk about it more. Adam, if you would go on to the next slide. This is the only slide that I have to show. 1830, and this is where we are today. 1830 is significant. That's the year the Indian Removal Act was passed in Washington, D.C. An act of Congress that was quite simply a formal expulsion order to rid the United States of America of every Indian east of the Mississippi River. Now, I don't have much more to say here today. I am a local history writer, but for too long, only certain voices got to tell the story, could control the facts, and how those facts were presented as history. So let's use this moment today to start again, to have a new perspective on the past. And let's use two words to guide us with that new perspective. And those words are acknowledgement and obligation. From this day forward, let's acknowledge that the circumstances and the methods that were used to take the last communal homeland of the Miami Nation and what that meant to turn that into the last named county in the state of Indiana. And from this day forward, let's agree that we have an obligation to ensure that the correct voices are telling the story. 1830, the Indian Removal Act. I'm a local history writer, and now I'm going to shut up. I would like to introduce you to Diane Hunter, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer of the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma. Diane.
Aya. See, people who know are here. Tepewene wa kakoke wa hanungi kakikwe, checha kokwa wens riane, nilametasenia miamiquia. Sekakweta nehepalanzwa alathakasiane. So as most of you know, or many of you know anyway, I just introduced myself in Miamiata Wenge, the Miami language, and I just said hello, it's good to see all of you here today. My name is Diane Hunter. I am a citizen of the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma, and I am a descendant of Sekakweta and Palanzwa, who are also known as the Godfroys. And I am honored to serve my nation as Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. Now, what I would like to do today is to focus on the anniversary that's coming up. We're on the 175th year of our forced removal, the forced removal of the Miami Tribe from Indiana. So I want to focus on that, but you can't understand what happened at that time unless you know what came before. So I'm going to give you a brief history of Miami people leading up to that point. And then I'm going to talk to you about the tribe today, because removal was not the end of the story. So I will begin at the beginning. Mitame, Miamiake, Nipangonje, Sakachuecheke. At first, the Miami came out of the water. Now that's the first line of our oldest story. It's the story of our emergence as Miami people. Now, we don't know where we came from specifically before that. We believe that we came from the north based on some of our stories, but we don't know exactly where. We don't know who we were before, and we don't know exactly when this happened. But when we came out of the water, we were a unique and different people who came to call ourselves Miamiake, Miami people. When we came out of the water, we came out of a place called Sakiweonge. I should have a pointer because I'm too short. But you can see here that little sun shape there. That is approximately where Sakiweonge was. Sakiweonge was somewhere on the St. Joseph River between what is today South Bend, Indiana, and Lake Michigan. We don't know the exact location, but our stories tell us that it was somewhere on that river in that area. We came out of the water and we established a village there. And we lived there, we don't know how long. And after a while, small groups started to leave. And they went out throughout what is today Indiana, Western Ohio, even into what is today Illinois. And we established villages. Now you'll see here several of our villages. These are not by any means all of our villages, but they're the ones that we know, specifically that we know by name today. One of our largest villages, or I should say metropolitan area, a conglomeration of villages, was at Kikayonge, today's Fort Wayne. And a lot of our villages were along the Wapashikisipiwe, the Wabash River. But not all our villages were in that area. There was a village on the Pinjewamutaye, the Piwe, Wildcat Creek, right here. Now, our first contact with Europeans, after having lived here since time immemorial, our first contact with Europeans was by trade goods that had been traded from other tribes and disease, of course, that had been passed along. In the mid-1600s, there were the Beaver Wars, and we didn't want a part of that. We wanted to get away from that. So we went west into what is now Illinois and north into what is today Wisconsin. And while we were in the Green Bay area, we encountered the French face to face. They were French Jesuit missionaries and French traders. By the early 1700s, it was safe to come home, and we did. We came back to our villages in what is today Indiana. And the French came too. They liked trading with us. And so the traders came, and we continued trading with them. By the mid-1700s, we were also trading with the British. This area you see here is Miami-Onge, the land of the Miami. And though you see borders, those are not really borders. They're just kind of a rough idea of how far Miami-Onge extended. So in 1763, there was the Treaty of Paris, in which the French gave the British their rights to this area. Now, the French, at least the French who were here, understood that they didn't own the land. It wasn't their land. They understood that they had the rights to trade with us, to live in certain places, to have diplomatic rights with us. Not clear to me what the British thought that they got. But in the Treaty of Paris 1783, that's the treaty that ended the American Revolutionary War, it's very clear that the Americans understood that what they got was the land. This was now their land. We didn't see it that way. We weren't at the Treaty of Paris negotiations. I don't know that we even knew they were going on. We had not sold this land. We had not ceded this land. We had not given it away. It was our land. And when I say our, I don't mean just Miami. It was ours and many other tribes who lived in the same area. But the Americans started coming, and they came west, and they came down the Ohio and into Miami-Onge. They came into our land. Now think about it. What would you do if someone came onto your property, started cutting down your trees and building a house? You'd want to get them out. Get rid of them. Get them out of here. Well, we did too. And that led to us attacking them attacking us, lots of skirmishes, which ultimately led to war. And the war ended with the Treaty of Greenville, 1795. And in this treaty, we ceded most of what is today Ohio and some portions of what is today Indiana and a tiny, tiny bit of of Illinois. This was going to be good. This was going to be peace. They had their land, we had our land. We were going to be good neighbors, and it was going to be all right. But the Americans kept coming, and they started coming into what is today southern Indiana. And they wanted us to cede more land. And so there were more treaties. And there was a treaty in 1805, in 1809, in 1818, in 1826. And you see, we've ceded by now most of what is today Indiana. Now, at the Treaty of 1826, as they're negotiating, the United States didn't want just the land. They wanted us to go west of the Mississippi River. They wanted us to just exchange the land we had here for land west of the Mississippi. But they commented it was impossible to procure the assent of the Potawatomis or Miamis to a removal west of the Mississippi. They are not yet prepared for this important change in their situation. Clearly, they saw it as something that was going to happen. They were determined it was going to happen. So their plan was they would starve us out. Just kill off all the game, then we don't have any fresh food, and we'll starve. And they'll move in around us. They'll be living around us and between us and separate and divide us. And we will just want to get out of here. Or, if we don't, they didn't really have a plan. If we didn't want to, other than starving us, we just might die. There was another treaty in 1828. This was a very small treaty. It ceded 10 square miles at Thorntown. So that was just a small treaty. But overall, we were adamant. We were not going to go west of the Mississippi. We were not going to leave. And they had no power to make us leave until, as Gil referred to, the 1830 Indian Removal Act. Now, that act didn't allow them to force us to remove west, but it did give the president the right to exchange land for us. Exchange our land here for land west of the Mississippi. And it opened the door for more. In fact, just 2 years later, in July of 1832, there was a new law, an act to enable the president to extinguish Indian title within the states of Indiana, Illinois, and the territory of Michigan. That's just the title, but I think it says it all. And that opened wide the gates for Indian removal in this area. So, just 2 months later, in September of 1832, U.S. commissioners came to our council house at the Forks of the Wabash in Huntington, Indiana, and they wanted to meet with our national council. They wanted land along the Wapashekee-Stepiwig, the Wabash River, because they wanted to build the canal. But mostly, they wanted us to go west. Now, there were several negotiations over this, but they all went something like this. You should go west. We will not go. Think about it. We need a definite answer. We will not go. We'll talk about it tomorrow. And tomorrow, the conversation continued just like that. At the end of one of these conversations, Pinjewa, John B. Richardville, said this: "Father, we think our answer is good. You point to the west and ask us to go there. There I shall never go, nor will my people. They are all opposed to leaving here. They will not sell their lands. I speak not for myself, but for my people." So they got nothing from us in this negotiation, nor in the next. But finally, on October 23rd, 1834, we signed another treaty. And we ceded lands again. Now, one of the features of the 1834 treaty was individual reserves, meaning of the lands that we were ceding, there were certain sections of land that were reserved to individuals or to small villages, so that they were privately owned. They weren't owned by the tribe as a whole, but they were owned by individuals. And we absolutely insisted that we have those individual reserves in the treaty. And the treaty negotiators recognized that they weren't going to get a treaty without it. So we signed the treaty. It went to President Andrew Jackson. He didn't want those individual reserves, and he refused to sign the treaty. He wanted that land, but because of the individual reserves, he wouldn't sign the treaty. It wasn't until 3 years later, when the new president, Van Buren, signed the treaty and ratified it. So this was a real win for us. We had beat Andrew Jackson, the author of Indian removal. We had beat him at his own game. We got our individual treaties in spite of him. So that was good. That was really good. I should mention, because of where we are, that one of the signers of the original 1834 treaty was someone named Kokomo, believed to be most likely the man that we call today Kokomo. Now, he didn't sign the ratified treaty in 1837, so we can fairly comfortably assume that he passed sometime between 1834 and 1837. But at the second ratification, the final ratification of the treaty, the president signs it, they bring it back to us, we sign it. We had just put the ink on the paper, and the U.S. commissioners say, we want to negotiate another treaty. So, a year later, 1838, November of 1838, we ceded more land. And all we have left now of communal land, not counting the individual reserves, but communal land, all we have left is that white spot in the middle known as the Great Miami Reserve. And you notice what's right in the middle of that white spot today? Right where we are right now, Kokomo. That land was still, this land where we are, was still Miami land in 1838. But there was something very significant in this treaty, and I'd like to read to you a passage from the treaty. And whereas John B. Richardville, the principal chief of said tribe, is very old and infirm, and not well able to endure the fatigue of a long journey, it is agreed that the United States will pay to him and his family the proportion of the annuity of said tribe, which their number shall indicate, to be due to them at Fort Wayne. whenever the said tribe shall emigrate to the country to be assigned them west as a future residence. Now, there are two really important points in that one paragraph. The first is, this is the first time in any treaty that we have agreed to even consider going west. We did not agree that we would, but we agreed that we would consider it. And up till now, we had not even considered that much. Up till now, we had been saying we will not go. Seems to me that, at least in part, we were giving up hope that we could survive as a nation if we stayed here. The other part of it was an exemption for Pinjewa, Richardville. And he tells us why. Because of his age, he was 77 years old at this time, and that's old. In that day, that was very old. He was one of very few Miami people who were that old. And his health was bad. I think there were likely other reasons. I'm not going to go into them today. I do have a blog post if you would like to learn more about that. But it's too much to go into right now. But there were many reasons why he was exempted. And I don't believe, having read much about him, I don't believe that it was that he didn't care about his people. He was a man who cared deeply about his people and made decisions based on what was good for them. But then there was the Treaty of 1840. And in the Treaty of 1840, we ceded the Great Miami Reserve in exchange for land west of the Mississippi. That same language that they had put to us 14 years earlier, exchange your land here for land west of the Mississippi. But now we agreed to do it. And more importantly, we agreed that the tribe would be removed to that land west of the Mississippi. We have to ask why. Why did they agree to it? Every member of the National Council signed that treaty. Why? Why did they do it? I think there were a lot of reasons. There was a lot of pressure on Miami people at this time, a lot of pressure, and particularly on our men. Our men were not allowed to do so many of the things that Miami men had always done. And they were just under a lot of pressure. And we see this in many, many cultures and many, many places. When men are under pressure, it often leads to violence, which it did. It led to violence and it led to death. And that had to stop. Somehow that had to be stopped. We also had mounting debts. And I could do a whole talk about the debts because it's a huge story. But we had great debts. We had been paying off our debts as we sold the land in the treaties. But if we sold this last piece of land and we have more debts, and we didn't take the land and go west, now we have no land, we have debts, we have no way to pay for them. That's not a good situation either. I think one of the most significant reasons why they agreed to sign is that over the last number of years, most of our experienced members of our National Council, that's our government, our leaders, most of the experienced members had died in the last dozen years. And by this time, really the only experienced members of the National Council were Pinjewa, Richardville, and his second chief, Francois, also known as Francis Godefroy. On May 1st, 1840, Francois died. Within that same month, Richard Bill went to Samuel Milroy, Indian agent, and said, I want another treaty. Richard Bill recognized that he was the only one left now who had experience to get his people through this crisis. And the only way he could do it was if they could get out of the situation and go west. He was making a tough decision, but it was the only decision he could see that would help his people. So, another factor in the Treaty of 1840 was that it exempted the families of Francois and Mishinga. Their families did not have to go when the tribe went west. But nobody wanted to go. This was our home. It's where we had always lived since time immemorial. We had lived here, our ancestors had lived here. Our ancestors were the dust of this land. It's mentioned throughout the treaty negotiations. We don't want to leave our ancestors' graves behind. And we still didn't want to do that. So some sought to get more exemptions. And Makunzaqua, also known as Frances Slocum, was able to get an exemption for her and her family. One of the reasons that she gave that she should be exempted was that she had land, she had family, and she would be able to take care of herself if she remained, if she didn't leave. And she was an older woman, but a big factor was this being able to take care of herself. And she got the exemption. So a lot of the leaders, our tribal leaders, also were landowners. And they started putting in requests to be exempted as well. They could take care of themselves. They had their own land. They could do it too. Unfortunately, they were not successful in getting exemptions. Just another little tidbit about Kokomo. In this process, while they're asking for additional exemptions, David Foster and 100 white men, as it was described, I presume men from this area, supported Shependosha and 9 other Miami people in their petition to be exempted from removal. Now, we don't have anything more. There was no evidence that they were successful. But it is interesting that they were supported in this attempt by some of the Americans who live around and among them. Another piece about this is there was also an opportunity for individual reserves in the Treaty of 1840. And an individual reserve went to Tupia, Francis LaFontaine. That reserve you are sitting on right now is right here. We're actually kind of on the north edge of it, but it was right here where Kokomo is. Probably they gave Tupia the reserve because there were still descendants, Shependosha and other descendants from Kokomo's village still living here. And this would allow them to have this place to live if he had that individual reserve. Well, shortly after that, Shependosha and the rest of the village moved to join Mishinga, their relatives. So LaFontaine sold the reserve to a man named Allen Hamilton, who then sold it to David Foster. And I imagine those of you who are from Kokomo know the story of what happened then. But Foster platted the town of Kokomo of that reserve. So the exemptions for most people didn't happen. They didn't want to go. They kept putting it off. They had 5 years. And the US, of course, wanted them to go early in that 5 years, not wait till the end. But they kept putting it off. You know, I've got to harvest my crops before I can go. I've got this individual land that if I leave, I'll lose it. I've got to sell it before I can go. Whatever reason we could come up with not to go yet. And especially once we started that process of trying to get more exemptions, we don't want to go yet because we want to make sure, you know, maybe we can be exempted and we won't have to go. But the 5 years came and went. And in October 1846, 175 years ago next month, American soldiers came to our villages and rounded us up from our homes and took us to a prison camp in Peru, Indiana. There were some people, particularly those who were in Wawayasita's and Papakich's villages, and a few from Turtletown, who, when they heard the soldiers had come, fled. They fled north to Michigan, intending to join the Pokagon Potawatomi. But most of them were taken from their villages and held for a few days there in that camp in Peru. On October 5th, they loaded some Miamiake onto 3 canal boats. The canal went right through Peru. And on October 6th, they loaded 2 more canal boats, and the 6 canal boats with more than 300 Miamiake on board left Peru by the Wabash and Erie Canal. We were on the Wabash and Erie Canal going east. We went through Peru, Indiana. We'd already passed many, many familiar places, past people's homes, past places that we knew that were so familiar to us. As we go through Fort Wayne, we have to be remembering Kikayonga. Some of my ancestors were from Kikayonga, or I remember when your grandfather told us about as they're passing through all these familiar places. When they got into Ohio, they switched to the Miami and Erie Canal, and they took the Miami and Erie Canal south to Cincinnati. Now this is Cincinnati in 1848, so it's less than 2 years after we arrived there. I imagine it must have looked very similar to this when we were there. From the canal, we were marched down Main Street, this is Main Street right here, to the public landing. And we were put on to the steamboat, Colorado. Now, neither of these boats is the Colorado. I imagine, however, that the Colorado probably looked more like the one on the right than the one on the left. It just doesn't look as nice, and I'm sure they didn't use their finest steamboat to put us on. Now, the Cincinnati newspapers every day published the shipping news. What items had come into Cincinnati by the canals, and what items were leaving by steamboats from Cincinnati. So this is what was published about the day that we arrived and left Cincinnati. Daily receipts by the Miami Canal. 134 barrels of whiskey, 218 barrels of flour, 10 sacks of 115 pounds of wool, 8 barrels of varnish, 2 Indian ponies, Miami Indians 225 over and 78 under 8 years old. 49 perched stones, 4 pigs, and so on and so on. And shipments to St. Louis by the Colorado, 30 tons of dry goods, 32 casks of government stores, 350 Indians with their baggage. Now the Colorado had a passenger list. We were not on it. We were clearly considered cargo on these boats. We were not considered people. So we took the Ohio River. We were on the steamboat Colorado. We took the Ohio River to the Mississippi River, and then north on the Mississippi towards St. Louis. Now we've been sick. Many of us had been sick on the boats. We were not used to traveling by boat, and many of us were sick. But on October 18th, we had our first death. It was a baby. We know that the baby was from Wawiyasita's band. I mentioned that Wawiyasita's band, people from that band had fled, but not everyone did, and some were on the boats. I think about the mother of this baby holding her dead baby on the boat. She had to have been thinking, why am I here? Why didn't I flee with the rest of them? If I had fled, maybe my baby would still be alive. We don't know why she didn't flee. Maybe she was still pregnant. There were some births during the journey. Maybe she felt like 9 months pregnant. I can't flee with everyone else. Or maybe just having a baby in arms, it seemed too much, seemed safer to go on the boats than to flee with a baby. Whatever her reasons were, now she's on the boat, holding her dead baby and waiting to bury him. 2 days later, we had another death. This time was an elder man named Ottawa. Later that same day, we arrived at St. Louis. But they didn't take us to St. Louis. They put us on a sandbar in the Mississippi River called Bloody Island. And it was at Bloody Island. Now we are on the very edge of Miami-Onge, the very edge of land that is ours, land that is familiar to us. And we buried Ottawa and the Wawiyasita infant in what the Indian removal agent Joseph Sinclair called our peculiar funeral ceremony. Well, we waited on Bloody Island for 3 days. The steamboat Colorado was a big boat to go on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. But the Missouri River is very shallow, and there were a lot of shipwrecks on the Missouri River, and the Colorado was too big for it. And it took them 3 days to find the Clermont number 2 to take us on the Missouri River. And so on October 23rd, we continued our journey west on the Missouri. During those days, there were 4 more deaths, all children. On November 1st, we arrived at the Kansas Landing, also known as the Westport Landing, in the town of Kansas, today's Kansas City. We had to be really happy to get off those boats. 2/3 of us had been sick while we were on the Missouri River. We encamped overnight just outside the town, and the next day we started our journey south. The same day that we arrived, our horses arrived. They had brought our horses separately overland, and so they were there at the same time we were. So we took our horses, some rode in wagons. going 50 miles south to our new reservation. It was during this journey that a 16-year-old boy died. A total of 7 deaths during the journey. We arrived at our reservation in Kansas, what is today Kansas. You can see it marked over there on the eastern border of Kansas. It was unusually cold for early November. In spite of having tried to get us to come for so many years, the US government had provided no housing for us, only tents. So we arrived, we're sick, it's unusually cold. We've been eating food that's not our typical food. We're living in tents. It's a terrible situation. From the time that we left Peru until the end of the year 1846, at least 30 Mi'amiaki died. One of those was Shipakana, also known as Thomas Godfroy. He's the only other person who died during this time whose name we know. We know Thomas and we know Ottawa. The others who died, we don't know who they were. But we know Thomas. Thomas was a son of Polonswa, Francois Godfroy. So he was exempted. He didn't have to go on removal. But if you understand Mi'amia families, our father's brother's children and our mother's sister's children are not our cousins. They are our brothers and sisters. Thomas's brothers and sisters, who were not direct descendants of his father, were not exempted, and they were going on removal. People who lived in their household, but were not blood family, were going on removal. People that he loved were having to leave on the removal. And I just have to think that that's why he chose to go. He couldn't bear to see them leave and not go with them. We know about his death because on December 24th, 1846, Tupia, Francis LaFontaine, wrote, "Thomas Godfroy is very sick. His recovery is doubtful." On January 31st, the following year, 1847, we have a letter that was written by Seka Queta, widow of Polonswa, Thomas's mother. She wrote, "I drop you these few lines by my son William to inform you of my present distress. I have received news from the West that my dear son Thomas was about to die, and that there is no hopes in his recovery, which I do assure you is a pang to my heart. And what I feel so bad is that he died without my seeing him. I blame Mr. Sinclair, the removal agent, for he promised if I would let him go, that he would see that he would come back when he did. It was under that promise that I consented to let him go. But God's will be done. I relied on him as a white man of honor and father to us, but he belied me. I have to imagine that Seka Queta expressed the feelings of every mother who lost a child during this time. It was a hard winter. But then, in the spring, things started to get better. We were building our houses. We started to build businesses. We built a school for our children. And life was better. It was a good life for us. So many of the problems that we had had were diminished or even gone. It was so good. So much better life for us. And then American squatters started coming onto our land, living on our land. And even the U.S. Army had trouble getting them off. In the meantime, Kansas became a state. And new states had no money. So Kansas came up with this plan. We will just absorb all the reservations for all the tribes into Kansas, and then we can tax their land. Well, they couldn't do that. Those were sovereign nations. And we knew they couldn't, and maybe they knew they couldn't. I don't know. But in any case, we had to fight about it. We had to go to court about it. It was a stress and a worry for us. And then in the early 1860s, Civil War. Now, if you all grew up in Indiana like I did, you probably really didn't get taught much about the Civil War being fought out in Kansas. But there was a huge Civil War fight on the border of Kansas and Missouri. And where were we? Right on the border. And they were fighting on tribal lands. Fortunately, they weren't fighting on our land, but those bushwhackers from Missouri were coming right through our land, and they were terrifying. Our women had always been our farmers. Farming was women's work. But now our women were afraid to go into the cornfields because of what those soldiers might do. Things were not so good anymore. After the Civil War, the United States government wanted us to remove again. This time they wanted us to go south to Indian Territory. And things were so bad, we agreed to go. So this was different though. Unlike the first removal, where a large group, over 300 people, are removed at one time, this was more a family at a time, or maybe a small group of families at a time, over a period of 15 years that we removed from Kansas south to northeastern Oklahoma. And that's where the seat of government for the Miami tribe was. And I'm going to jump way ahead in time now to the 1930s. Under the 1936 Oklahoma Indian Welfare Act, the Miami tribe reorganized as a federally recognized Miami tribe of Oklahoma. And our Constitution was ratified in 1939. So the tribe went west. As we know, a few families were allowed to stay in Indiana. Some stayed in Kansas. There was a lot of back and forth over those years between Indiana and Kansas, Indiana and Oklahoma. But we were divided. And with the 1939 Constitution, only those in Oklahoma were allowed to be citizens of the tribe. But in 1996, the tribe amended our Constitution, which allowed virtually anyone of Miami descent could now be a citizen of the Miami tribe of Oklahoma. And that's why you have so many citizens of the Miami tribe of Oklahoma sitting right here today, because of that 1996 amendment. But the result of our removal is that we are a divided people. We have 3 primary population centers in Miami, Oklahoma, in eastern Kansas, and in northeastern Indiana. Well, we have people living in every state in the Union. And what happens when you're so divided and you have such small numbers? At one point in Oklahoma, there were only 69 citizens of the tribe. We're surrounded by people who are not Miami. And in Indiana, even before removal, we were being surrounded by people who were not Miami. And what happens in those situations is you begin to adopt parts of the culture of the people around you. And you start to assimilate to that culture. And when you do that, you lose part of your own culture. And our culture began to go to sleep. Our last native speakers of our language, Miami Antawenge, died in the 1960s, 1970s. Maybe a few who could speak some words beyond that, but that was it. But today, the Miami tribe of Oklahoma has our seat of government in the town of Miami, Oklahoma, in northeastern Oklahoma, in Ottawa County. We are governed by the General Council. Now, the General Council is any citizen of the tribe, 18 years or older, who comes to the annual meeting and votes. At that meeting, we vote for our elected leaders who carry out the business of the tribe throughout the year. But just as importantly as voting, at that meeting, we tell our leaders what we want them to do. Miami leaders have always been servant leaders. Their job is to carry out the will of the people. And so that's what our leaders today do. And these are our current elected leaders. The gentleman in the center is Douglas Langford, our current chief. We are a sovereign nation, which means that we have the right to govern and to support our own people. We have our own police force. For those who are citizens of the tribe and live in Oklahoma, they can get license plate tags from the tribe instead of from the state of Oklahoma. They have the right, just like states have a right to issue their license plates as a sovereign nation, we have that right too. We have services for our people. We have a preschool in Miami, Oklahoma. We have many services for our elders, some that are there in Oklahoma and some that serve all of us elders wherever we live, as long as we're citizens of the tribe. Miami Nation Enterprises is the economic political arm of the tribe, and they own a diverse portfolio of companies. And the earnings from that, the money that the tribe makes from these companies, goes back into supporting our government, providing the services to our people. It also provides cultural activities and cultural learning for us. We have gatherings, well, under normal circumstances, we have gatherings at least twice and sometimes 3 or 4 times a year. In addition to our annual meeting in June when we elect our leaders, we also have a winter gathering. Last couple of years, that winter gathering has been online, but we have a winter gathering. And when we are together, a highlight of the winter gathering is stomp dance. It's a traditional dance that we have started doing again. Another feature of the winter gathering is our storytelling. We have stories that have been passed down to us, and we tell those stories. Most of our stories are winter stories. They're stories that can only be told in the winter. In the fall, when the frogs stop croaking and we have the first hard frost, then we can start telling our stories. And we tell them until the spring. When the frogs start croaking, we have the first big thunderstorm, then we lay down that thread of storytelling. Some stories are history stories. The story I started out today is a history story. It can be told anytime. But the winter stories are only told in the winter. You notice our storytellers here are all young people. Traditionally, they should have been elders. But because of the cultural laws, our elders were not taught the stories. And today, our young people are learning these stories. They're telling the stories. And soon enough, they will be the elders passing those stories on to their children. So I said our language went to sleep in the 1960s, 1970s. But in the 1990s, we had a cultural revitalization, and part of that was starting to learn our language again. Today we have a language dictionary, we have a language learning app, we have classes where we teach the language. In the summer we have camps for our children where they learn the language, they learn about our culture, they learn about our history, they learn about the environment, they learn about plants. What do we call them? How do we use them? How do we use them today? Most of all, they learn how they are connected to each other as Miami people. All those things that tie us together as Miamiake. We still play games that we have played since time immemorial. We play lacrosse. Thank you. Lacrosse is a traditional native game. The Iroquois claim that they invented it, and I have no reason to doubt that. But it was so popular, everybody started playing it. All the tribes in the northeast part of the United States started playing it, and we have been playing since time immemorial. In recent years, we have changed from playing with modern sticks to traditional sticks. My colleague has started making traditional style lacrosse sticks, and we play with those sticks now instead of the modern sticks. And you can see Chief there with his traditional stick. He's going to catch the ball. But look who's in the game. It's old men and young children. It's men and women, boys and girls, all ages. Nobody's wearing pads. Nobody's wearing helmets. Nobody cries when they get hurt. Now, some of the men do. But that's because they get hurt the worst. But everybody's very gentle with the little children so that none of the little children get hurt. And we all just have fun. Whoever wants to play, plays. I have seen a game with as many as 200 on the field at one time. That's how we play, and we love it. Other games that we play, go ahead. Sangzawinga is a dice game. You toss those dice in the bowl, and how they fall, you get certain points. And whoever gets 10 points wins. A game can take one turn, or it can take hours. Kind of like Monopoly, right? Moccasina is a hide the pedal game. So one team hides the pedal under, used to be moccasins, now it's just hot pads. And the other team has to figure out where the pedal is. These originally were gambling games, but gambling was a completely different thing. You come and you bring something to bet. You have an extra pair of moccasins, you're going to bet those. You've got an extra bow, you're going to bet that. None of you men can bet your house because your wife owns it. You're not going to lose your house. And whoever wins, winner take all. They get all the prizes. But you know, we have a high value we place on gift giving. So the winner gets to give gifts, and he distributes the winnings among the other players. So you might go home with a pair of moccasins that somebody else brought, and you might get the bow that somebody else brought. But everybody goes home with something. Today we don't bet. As you can see, it's often children playing, so we just leave that part out. But we love to play. It's fun to play, and we play them all the time, all year round. Unlike lacrosse, which I should mention, it's only played in the spring and summer. We start playing lacrosse in the spring. When the frogs start croaking, we have the first big thunderstorm. And in the fall, when the frogs stop croaking and we have a hard frost, we lay down our lacrosse sticks and we pick up the thread of storytelling. Go on. Ribbon work is a traditional Miami art. Now, many of the tribes in the Great Lakes region do ribbon work. It's a sewing art, and but ours is unique in that a lot of the tribes do floral patterns or other kinds of designs. Our ribbon work is always geometric diamond patterns. You can see the one here on the right. That's probably a couple of 100 years old. But we are doing ribbon work again. We can see how it was made. And now we're doing ribbon work. We've got a great ribbon work doer back here near the back here today. But you can see, like the hat band, that's modern ribbon work. And we're learning. Men and women, older people, young people, we're all learning to do ribbon work. And we use it in all kinds of ways. It's not just that we sew ribbon work now. This is a traditional design for Miami people. So we put it on our t-shirts, printed on our t-shirts. We put it on our PowerPoint slides. One person put it on his cell phone case. If you see designs like this on a shirt, somebody walking down the street, chances are they're Miami. It's a part of our culture that had gone to sleep, but now is being revitalized, and it's a part of who we are, and we love it. So I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma, and my work as SIPO, as it's called, is about our identity, who we are as Miami people. It's about our way of life. It's about our unique perspective that comes from our language, our culture, our history. And it's about passing things on to the next generation. Mission Nawak, thank you very much for listening. I'm open for questions. Yes.
Were the Miami a pottery people or a basket people?
Probably both.
Okay.
We don't have, that's something that we've lost, but likely we did both. I mean, certainly pottery, because until we started getting metal pots from the Europeans, we had to cook in something. I'm sure those women were so happy not to cook in something that was so easily breakable. Other questions? Yes.
I noticed the words are really long. Now, do they have a certain structure?
Yes, they do. And a word can be a sentence in English. Most of even our nouns are verbs. So it's they do this thing would all be built into one word, or I do this. Yeah, so they're very long, but they take many words in English. Probably not any longer by the time you said the thing in English. Yeah.
I'm curious about the relationship with the other tribes that were also being pushed.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a lot of other tribes in the same scenario.
Mm-hmm. So we had a lot of relationships with the Potawatomi. What we considered our land goes up into what is today part of Michigan. They came as far south as the Wabash River. So there's this area that we kind of both were in. Along the Wabash River, we have villages very close to each other. Not surprisingly, there was a lot of intermarriage between the Potawatomi and the Miami. And of course, you know, they had to have somebody to fight. So of course they would fight with other tribes as well. But there was also a lot of intermarriage. Certainly when we needed to fight the Americans, we all came together. The Shawnee and the Delaware, of course, had been further east, but they got pushed west into what is today Indiana. When the Shawnee wanted to come into our Niameyongit, they asked our permission. And we said, of course. You're our older brothers. Of course you can come in. When the Delaware wanted to come into our land, they asked our permission, and we said, of course, you are our grandfathers. Of course you can come in. Which is why it was so shocking the Americans didn't ask. They just came. Other questions? Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned earlier a peculiar funeral ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from the Valparaiso area, Ottawa. My grandfather, who was born 1891, told me that he played with Indian children. Evidently, they came back in the summertime after gardens and fields. My family let them live in our woods or on our property. And he witnessed a funeral. Among them, there was a graveyard on our property,
Mm-hmm.
and they put them up on stilts on the platform and allowed the birds to pick up the flesh. Is that what they might have been talking about?
No. I don't know if we ever did that. Generally, we buried it. There may have been times when we did that depending on certain circumstances, but mostly, people would have been buried. What he was referring to, I'm pretty certain, was something called the pekomata, and it is the words that we say when our funeral words, sending the person on.
Miami had contact with Tecumseh?
Yeah.
Is that a long story?
It is a long story, but the short version is, when Tecumseh said, "Can I come and live on your land?" we said, "No way." But he came anyway. Yeah, we didn't, at that point, we weren't interested in fighting. We'd signed that treaty in 1795. We didn't want to fight. Now, ultimately, it led into the War of 1812, and we ended up being attacked by the U.S. and ended up, having to fight anyway. But he was just stirring up trouble, and we just didn't want any part of it. Now, that said, were there probably some young Miami men who joined him? Probably. But our tribal leadership said no, we don't want. We're done.
It's interesting that you said he's stirring up trouble. What I understand that he did, he tried to unite all the tribes to oppose the westward expansion of.
Yeah, but he wanted to fight. He wanted battle, and he did have battles, and we didn't want that. And they sought more of a pan-tribal approach. We're Miami. We're going to be Miami. We don't want to mix up from other tribes. I mean, we interact, we share, but we're not going to give up who we are to be part of some pan-Indian group. Yeah. Now, the Shawnee obviously have a different perspective on him, but that was our leadership at the time. Yeah. Any of my relatives back here have anything they want to add? Something I should have told and didn't.
I would love to ask Sue or Dick, who are the direct descendants, if they had any stories that they can add to it. I know both their parents were born in the house in Huntington. I don't know if it was that council house or not. But do you guys have any stories for us or any things that you want to share with us?
These stories too. That we passed out.
Nothing I want to share. I might add that you showed the council house. The foundation to that is still there. And
You have to take me to
the house on the other side of the road was built by LaFontaine. So Richardville never had council in that house. They were all in council house. Which, when our family lived there, it was used as a garage. And then after the property was sold, the man that bought it tore it down. The most historic piece out there.
Yeah.
But we had people from all states come to the property to write up their reports. And evidently, all of the council houses along the river on down to Wabash, Peru, etc., the same size. So the structure is still there in the park, but it's all clear up. You can't see it.
Still there? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's important. Yeah.
In this resurgence of awareness and education and everything, do you feel that this is also a step in the right direction to unify the three tribes? Obviously, you've got the Oklahoma that's recognized by the government, but then Kansas and Indiana. Do you feel that the leadership of the three might see this as a hopeful means to come together as a single tribe?
I mean, I think that's what the 1996 constitutional amendment was intended to do, is to bring everybody together so that wherever we lived, that we could all, Miami people, could be part of the one tribe.
Well, if there's nothing else, what can I say? I would like to say I'm going to key on you were talking about one of the games.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that the winner had to then accumulated the gifts and then had to disperse them. I feel, and I hope everyone will agree, we feel like winners today from having had this experience with you, and I hope we would all share those gifts. I was really, we were so honored that you picked time ahead of the anniversary month, because I hope that we can all, in October, think about what happened 175 years ago. And we'll remember. Indeed. We'll hope to have you back again.
I'll be glad to come back.
Thank you very much. Well,
Thank you.
on behalf of Sue and Dick and the Moore family, Mr. Mayor, and the library, and myself, thanks for coming today. It's been great.